good, thank you.
We've got Marc Ganzi here today. This is the first time we've actually had him do a fireside chat. We've done interviews with him before, but this is we're very, very excited to get 30 minutes of his perspective on where the world is right now. So, Marc, welcome to PTC'DC. So it's been a good first day, and we're excited about hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate the invitation.
Maybe start us off with, obviously you're sitting, the biggest challenge right now is this conference is largely about how the United States and countries should start enabling themselves for this new digital revolution that's going on. And I think one of the big issues is the last 6 months has been just extraordinary in terms of obviously what's going on in DC, but also just the growth that we're seeing around the world. And maybe from your perspective, you think, what do you think are the key issues as we start looking out over the horizon for the next year or so as to what are the key things that we need? There are government officials here. There's a bunch of CEOs. How does the economy and the government sector need to come together to sort of deal with a lot of these issues?
Well, I think the issues that we face today here in the United States are not terribly dissimilar from what we're seeing in Europe and Asia, and in Latin America and the GCC. Maybe the GCC to a lesser degree, but when we sit in a room and we look at the 10 different businesses that are out there building AI infrastructure for us. We have 10 different companies around the world that build data center infrastructure. The number one issue today is really power, that you can't go anywhere without having a conversation about power. A couple years ago it was about permitting. That's to a lesser degree the challenge, but the power density required to fuel what our customers want to do today is just at an entirely different level than it was 12 months ago, 18 months ago. The speed at which tokens are growing are stunning. We said this in our last quarterly call. Our friends at Google said it quite well. Tokens grew 3x, Bill, in 90 days. It's hard to sort of fathom how fast that's growing. I've been building infrastructure for 30 years, and I've watched the rise of internet traffic, mobile data traffic. We watched the rise of public cloud for 13 years. What we're seeing in terms of the consumption and the speed at which the adaptation is happening in AI is really hard for anyone to comprehend because, it was a linear relationship in terms of how compute worked before, which was there was ultimately someone behind that application trying to query it and trying to come up with an outcome. And now today the human is being removed from that. And you have these models talking to each other, and their ability for AI agents to create that data and to create that query or to create that workload is so much faster than a human, and that's what's creating this velocity of data. And so we're trying to keep up with it, and the reality is we can't keep up with it. I mean, if you look at the data and you look at the supply and trade imbalance of what our customers want in terms of demand versus what all of the grids around the world can actually deliver, there's a massive insufficiency. So last year was the first year that we had a trade and supply balance globally of about 1 gigawatt of power. So what does that mean? It means the industry signed last year approximately just under 6 gigawatts of leases. But the power side of the equation only delivered about 5.2 gigawatts versus 5.9 gigawatts of signed leases. This year what will happen is the industry will sign roughly just a little under 7 gigawatts. And again, the grid is only delivering about 5 gigawatts of power. So what's happening is you have this widening gap. And that gap really gets exacerbated in 2030, where you have about 9.8 gigawatts of power being built or delivered against 21 gigawatts of demand. So what do we do? That's really the conundrum. And I think, we can talk about the debate of whether where China's going is faster and better than what we're doing, or what we're doing is better than what China's doing. I kind of am sort of numb to that political argument about which LLM is better than the other. I think you have a certain set of facts where you've got a series of privately financed LLMs in this part of in this hemisphere, and then you've got one very large LLM that's being financed by a state machinery. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to whether it's Johor, Santa Clara, whether it's Offenbach, Germany, wherever you are, the same conversation is happening over and over again, which is how do you get power?
Yeah, and I think. Well, I mean, I think you're right on the model side. Obviously, the China, there's one of them. There's six models here in the U.S. But the Chinese are actually building a lot more power. I mean, one of the slides that we went through yesterday, we were talking about the fact that they have 20 nuclear power plants that are coming on stream over the next 10, 12 years. And they will actually they already have more power than we do.
And they built 60 gigawatts of solar
Yeah.
in the last decade.
Yeah, so you've got, so the reality is they do have the power for the moment. And the question is, will we be able to compete if we've got this long pole in the tent, which is the power, we have a power shortage. And I mean, how do you fix that? Do you think it's going to have to be the private sector coming inbound into and starting to play behind the grid and trying to do different types of initiatives like that? Is that where you think? Cause,
at the end of the day, we're not in a competition with China about power. They're winning there.
Yeah.
That's easy for them.
Yeah.
The hard part is if you look at some of the three major Chinese data center providers and you go into one of their data centers are 90% empty. So you can go build the biggest data centers in the world, but if you don't have one critical element, which is compute, you don't have a data center.
Yeah.
If you don't have a customer, you don't have a data center. If you don't have a GPU, you don't have a data center. So you've got three good providers in China building massive amounts of capacity with a lot of power behind them, but functionally they have one customer.
Yeah.
I kind of like our odds in that fight a little better. We have the opposite problem, which is we have not only 6 customers, we actually, by our math, we have 11 really good customers that we're building for across my 10 data center businesses around the world. And I don't have enough space, power, and cooling for those core 11 customers that do business with DigitalBridge or Switch or Vantage or DataBank or Yonder. So we have the opposite problem, which is we're trying to figure out how to solve for how do we create the power. So we started about 2 years ago down that road. We formed a partnership with another developer that we really like, that we feel like has our industrial DNA, which is ArcLight, who's been around for 30 years. And they've built over $80 billion of different power projects around the world, similar to how we've built about 120 billion of data centers and other AI infrastructure. So we took an industrial approach, Bill, to solving the problem, and really that's centered around one concept, which is grid independence. And we've now done it very effectively in Reno. We have a 1.8 gigawatt microgrid, which actually our microgrid that serves our SuperNAP is bigger than the entire power of Reno. Reno's grid is 1.3 gigawatts. Our SuperNAP is 1.8 gigawatts. So how do we do that? We did it with solar, we did it with wind, we did it with hydro. We just added 500 megawatts of LNG. We have a grid connection with Nevada Power and Light, which has been a great partner to us. But also in that microgrid, at various parts of the day, Bill, we have, on average, we have about 200 to 220 megawatts of excess power every day.
Wow.
We have 5 hours of battery storage. We can store up to 400 megawatts of power in our batteries. It's one of the largest battery storage facilities in the world. And we trade power between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So when Nevada Power and Light is going at peak, our power is consistent. We know our workloads 24/7. So we can optimize ultimately when they're at peak, we're selling power into the grid at spot rate.
Yep.
Between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., I'm buying power wholesale because they don't need the power.
Yep.
In addition to that, we built, a lot like fiber, we built an interconnection facility. It's funny how power is like fiber.
Yep.
So we're interconnected to Pacific Gas and Electric, Puget, Portland General, and Idaho Cooperative, along with Nevada Power and Light. So on 0.2 of a millisecond, I'm trading power all day long. We finally figured that out, how to optimize it. Much like Constellation does, NextEra does. They do the same thing. We just figured out what they do. Yep. Just like they're trying to figure out how to build data centers, I decided I had to figure out how to get in the power business. So what's great about that is, we're now on to building another 9 microgrids. We've raised $5 billion of new capital. We're putting that capital to work with ArcLight. And we have other projects besides just building microgrids. There's other things we're doing in power that we're pretty excited about. But everything we're doing around power is with one notion, which is to keep us moving forward in the AI race. Yep. Because look, if we sit around and we wait for the public utility commissions of the states, we're never going to get there. Yep. And there's nothing that DOE or FERC can do about that. Yep. At the end of the day, the way we set up the utility structure in the U.S. is it is a state-by-state game. Yep. Set pricing, tariff pricing. And so that is a tricky, game to navigate. If you're a hyperscaler and all of a sudden you end up in Louisiana and you're sitting in front of the Louisiana PUC board and you're trying to figure out how to power 800 megawatts, they speak a different language than we speak. So we had to spend 2 years learning their language. What I like about what we've done in Reno and what we've done in Sao Paulo and what we've done in Johor is we're now a net contributor to the grid. What does that mean? It means the amount of power we're producing in our microgrid is more than what we're taking from the grid. So as long as we're a net contributor to the grid, we're considered a positive.
Yeah.
And we move right up the list in terms of how to go from will serve letter to activation date. You have to do that. You have to create a solution where you're being a part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because right now at every PUC board, every data center is a problem.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's Virginia with Dominion, whether you're sitting in Texas with ERCOT. You know, we made a big announcement last week in Lancaster. We're building 1.1 gigawatts of grid independent power. And ERCOT found out about it. Now we're interconnected to ERCOT, and we're going to sell 200 megawatts in ERCOT.
Oh,
and then
wow.
we're buying 400 megawatts back from Encore. So there's a game here you have to understand, which is that there's puts and takes in power. You have to be very localized in your approach, and you have to be a positive contributor to the grid.
What do you think about, push it offshore now? So, a lot of like in this audience today, we've got a lot of folks from overseas and various countries, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and a lot from Asia, obviously. Trying to figure out also how they play the game in those markets, right? Because the U.S. it's not easy, but there's a roadmap, right? But I mean, what are you doing in places like Japan or in Southeast Asia, and how do you actually get there? Because those are a little bit less transparent in terms of the rules to play.
Look, every market is very different. Japan is very difficult.
Yeah.
We have a really big data center campus in Osaka, and we're stuck. We're stuck at 60 megawatts. We need to get to 200 for our customer there. And there's not a path to get to a solution, and they're not as fungible as we are in terms of, okay, I can go buy 100 megawatts of solar there, and I can go buy 20 megawatts of wind, and I can bring it in, and then I can trade power. Some of these markets are just not quite as evolved as we are in terms of renewables and how you interconnect those renewables into the grid. I would say, economies that we like that have been very easy to work with, Malaysia's been fantastic. Indonesia's getting a lot better. Singapore is shut. There's no more power left on that grid, which is why we went to Johor to build 200 megawatts across the river. Korea is very, very, very easy to work with, but the customers don't love being in Korea. So all these markets have different puts and takes. Australia is great. That's been a great market for Vantage and for AirTrunk. And so, you have to pick your spots, but again, outside of places like the Middle East where they have an abundance of power, everywhere else is power constrained. We have the same problem in Sao Paulo, which is why we built an 800 megawatt microgrid in Sao Paulo to serve our customers at Scala. So we're just trying to find the right air pockets where we can get things done and move quickly.
What do you think about? Obviously the big 100-pound gorilla in the room is the Chinese, right? Which is, do you think your portfolio will ever extend into mainland China, or do you think it's always going to be sort of this? We're going to stay on the outside and sort of, and it seems like in the short term, most players are avoiding China. But do you think that's, when we look out 15 years, because there was a very integrated portion of our economy for probably 20 years. And now it's completely persona non grata in this world. And where do you think it ends? Because do you think it's become closer, or what's your thoughts? I know you've been in the White House, you've been around the politics a lot for a long time. What's your thoughts?
Perhaps I'm a bit more sanguine than others are, but we do business with 3 of the major Chinese hyperscalers around the world. They're very easy to do business with. They're very commercial. In fact, on the margin, they pay us higher rents than the U.S. hyperscalers.
Yeah.
That being said, it's really hard for us to invest in China because the Chinese make it very difficult to do so.
Yeah.
And so I'd flip the tables back on China, which is you need to change the way you do business for us to invest with you.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the right governance and you don't have the right transparency for capital markets and you don't have the ability to get exits, it's really hard for a private investor like us or any other major asset manager in the world to continue to commit capital to China when you don't have a path out.
Yeah.
So I made an investment in towers in China. And I bought a company called Q Towers about 15 years ago. And it was a really great investment, and we had gotten to about 5,000 towers in 2 years, and we were making money. And all of a sudden, the Chinese government just shut us down because they had instituted something called the National Tower Company, which they took public. And so when you don't play fair and you don't have the right structure to a market formation, you're never going to get private capital to invest in China. Sorry.
Yeah.
Make the rules fair for everyone to compete, and they don't compete fairly. They
Yeah.
create national champions, and they put you out of business. So it took us 8 years to sell the business. We ended up selling it to Protolindo. We lost permits on about 1,000 towers, where we were really successful. We had 3 tenants on the tower, and they just pulled the permit.
Yeah.
So that was a great lesson. We ended up getting out of there with about 1.3 times our money. We should have made 4 times our money, but
Yep.
until they change the way they think, it's really difficult for us to do that. That being said, like every other top 10 asset manager in the world, we manage money for CIC, we manage money for SAFE, we manage money for Rosewood, Silk Road, HKMA. All of these folks put money with us in Brookfield and Blackstone, and so we'll continue to have a great relationship. I go to China twice a year. We own 7 data centers in Hong Kong. We have one of the seat licenses in Hong Kong. We work really well with the Chinese government there. I have no problem with China, honestly.
Yep.
I have a problem with their market structure. I have a problem with the way they treat, foreign investors. But it's up to them. If they want to change the way they deal with foreign investors, they'll get investment. But they don't want our capital.
Yeah.
The reality is they don't want us.
Yeah.
So until that changes, there was a time and period 20 years ago where they wanted us.
Yeah.
Because they wanted our IP. Let's be honest. So now they don't need that, and so the world has been divided into 2 camps, and history would show that perhaps that comes back together at some point and it converges. But for right now, what we tell our investors is we don't invest in mainland China.
Okay.
It's just a hard no for us.
Let's switch gears a little bit. One of the asset classes in digital infrastructure, you and I have talked about this many times, but is fiber.
Yep.
You've got Steve Smith spoke yesterday from Zayo. Always has been, the last 10 years has sort of traded at a lower multiple than obviously the data centers, right? And it seems like it's starting to turn, I think, with AI a little bit. And it's starting to see that, and when you look at like Metro Fiber and some of these, they're actually starting to trade up quite a bit. It's off and on. They've had a few corrections. But what do you think about the fiber space? Is it going to be sort of in this kind of utility level valuation, or do you think it gets back to the go-go days of the 90s where it was actually very, very sought after class of asset and high demand for it?
Look, no asset class was hotter in private investing in COVID than fiber.
Yeah.
So the minute infrastructure capital rotated into fiber, multiples traded up, Bill, 6 to 10 turns.
Yeah, no, I know.
So
but they've come down a bit since then.
There's a reality for that.
Yeah.
Gravity has a way of taking place when you don't have. The reality is what separates fiber from towers and data centers is churn.
Yeah.
That's what separates it. If we're just going to cut straight through it. And remember, the fiber business there's 4 different business models inside of fiber, just like now there's 6 different business models in data centers.
Yeah.
You can't just say data centers are like this and you paint it with a paintbrush and it's one broad stroke. The thing about fiber today is, we like 2 verticals a lot. There's a residential space called the MDU space, which is where we sign up a property owner to a 10-year contract, and we control the cable and the internet into that building, and it's in their HOA dues. And so immediately, the minute we sign that building, we have 100% penetration.
Yeah.
So we have one of those businesses. It's called Fiber Now. It competes against Hotwire in South Florida, and it's doing incredibly well. Why is it doing well? Because I get a 10 to 15-year contract with the building owner or the developer, and I don't have to chase and go door to door and sign up every customer.
Right.
So those businesses, Brookfield paid effectively 30 times for Hotwire.
Yeah.
That was an incredible multiple. It didn't make any sense to us. We paid essentially about 10.8 times for Fiber Now. So I like businesses that have high barriers to entry, and I like businesses where once we get in the door, we can close the door behind us.
Yeah.
So that element of fiber I like. Resi Fiber, we just bought Wide Open West. We paid under 5 times for that. We paid 30 cents on replacement cost per route mile. I think in Resi Fiber, you can find value right now for the first time. So while some things are trading up, like the MDU space, an overbuilder like WOW was depressed and had a lot of problems and requires CapEx, and we have to keep reinvesting in the network. So we're putting a new management team in place. We're working with the existing management team by augmenting them. We're giving the company $400 million in CapEx. We're putting a lot of physical capital in the ground in the physical plant, and we're going to go on the attack and go compete, and we think we can make a reasonable return doing that. The last 2 spaces, obviously, are enterprise and transport.
Yep.
The enterprise business, Steve Smith was here yesterday. You know what Zayo does. 63% of Zayo's EBITDA is enterprise.
Yep.
So we wake up every day and we compete against Lumen, we compete against Colt, we compete against EU networks. And that's a reasonably good business, but effectively that's a business that has a churn rate somewhere between 3 and 6%. So you've got to grow at 8 to 10% to make that business somewhat capital efficient. So that's a hard business in that sense. So, but we like it, we're competing, and Zayo, has now put up two years back-to-back of double-digit organic growth. So that's really good. The business I like the best is transport. And that is really long-haul transport, metro rings, laterals to towers, laterals to data centers, data center connectivity, and suboceanic. And that business at Zayo is phenomenal. Our weighted average customer contract is 17 years. Churn is inside 100 basis points, about 80 to 90 basis points. And what investors love about that is predictable. Long-term contracts with investment-grade customers, that starts to feel a lot like data centers and towers. So I think the storytelling around fiber is sort of the tale of four cities. And you got to really understand very carefully, one, the cash flows, the duration, the contract quality, what markets you're in. Are you an overbuilder? Are you an underbuilder? There's so many variables that go into fiber. I tell many of our investors around the world today, the most complicated space to be invested in is fiber. Yeah. It's the place where you can get hurt the most. And so look at some of the train wrecks that you're seeing now. It's very quiet because banks sort of keep that suppressed, but there's been multiple bankruptcies in the last 18 months by infrastructure investors that thought that fiber was towers and they paid 18 to 20 times for those assets, and now they're getting restructured. Yeah. There's been 7 restructurings in Europe. There's been multiple restructurings here in the US, and the cycle repeats itself. You overpay for fiber, you get burnt.
Yeah, they call the 363 bankruptcy. It's mentioned at the bottom of the press release, but
correct.
We just sold it, but they failed to mention the fact that they bought it from the banks as opposed to the equity guys. It is fascinating to see it coming out, and I think I did just hear you say submarine networks. That you're actually. I've never heard you even talk about submarine networks.
We own 28 diverse routes that crisscross the globe, and we're continuing to build, and we're going to continue to invest. Got really close on a big suboceanic deal about 2 years ago that we couldn't quite get there on valuation at the end of the day. But we have a team. We have 3 people at DigitalBridge that spend all their time working on that thinking about suboceanic networks. And look, as you know, these networks were built 25, 30 years ago.
Yep.
Glass underwater dissipates. There's going to be a massive reinvestment, as you know, into suboceanic cables. A lot of those existing networks need to be rebuilt. Conduit needs to be replaced. There's probably 60 to 70% of the global suboceanic network in the next decade has to be upgraded and replaced. Yeah. So that's going to happen. By the way, if you own a cable servicing business, what a great business.
Yes.
That's going to be a really good business because people are going to be really busy rebuilding these networks. And there's close to over 100 new diverse routes being planned around the world, as you know, from the Suboceanic Cable Conference. So that subsector of fiber doesn't get a lot of shine, but it's really important, and it's vital, it's strategic, and oh, by the way, there's national security now involved.
Yeah, well, I think
it's a really important business.
I think and also the fact that where AI goes and chases power is pushing fiber into new places that it never was before. And so that this becomes an interesting asset class because of that, because you're going to places that typically weren't beneficiaries of submarine cables before.
Look, we put $400 million to work at Zenith IG with Columbia Capital, who's been doing fiber for 30 years, Jim Fleming and his team. We love that business. And that business, their bookings are up 250% year over year. Yeah. So, building diversity and route diversity in Southeast Asia is really critical. And so our routes there are everything from Hong Kong to Singapore to KP, pushing down into Melbourne and Sydney, and then pushing out into India and further into the GCC. And so that space is going to require close to $50 billion of reinvestment bill in the next decade. $50 billion just to reinvest into existing plant, not new routes. That's reinvesting into existing networks. I don't think people talk about that a lot. They don't talk about the importance of that. But anyway, we're dedicating capital out of our third fund. We'd like to put probably 10 to 15% of the fund into suboceanic cables. So investing out of our new $8 billion flagship fund, we're talking about putting easily anywhere from 800 to 1.6 billion into suboceanic cables right now.
Well, that's great. And I agree. I think it's unfortunately, well, the good news is some of the cables that were built in 2000 were extraordinary cables. They were overbuilt, and so they lasted a long time. But yeah, you've got the vintage. I think is 17 years is the average cable age in the around the world today. So it is a big area. We've got a few minutes left. What I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is there's a lot of discussion yesterday about where we are from an economy standpoint, right? So there's a lot of, when you start looking at some of the indicators, you could have the naysayers say that we're at the edge of sort of a correction that possibly could happen. But then there's a lot of positive thinkers that sort of look at it and say, okay, well, this new AI revolution is actually helping to keep the U.S. economy out of a recession, for example. Just the CapEx spend alone is actually pivoting. If you look at the numbers, it's actually what is tipping us into growth versus not growth. If you were to take out all of the money spent on capital by the big six, we would actually be close to a recession, which is sort of an interesting, and so it's a question of where are we in this cycle, and are we at the edge of something, or are we in sort of just a steady growth out of here, and some of the indicators that in the past have led to recessions or kind of corrections. Should we be looking at those, or should we care? What's your thoughts? Because you're sort of thinking about this every day.
Yeah, look, I think, I'm, as one person once described me, I'm a perpetual optimist. I think I'm paid to be that. But I would say, we are in a really unique CapEx cycle. I don't think in my career have I ever been involved in a cycle where CapEx got reforecasted twice in 1 year. We talked about spending $250 billion in AI infrastructure this year. Immediately in the first quarter, that got recast to $300 billion. And then by the end of the second quarter, the new forecast was $380 billion.
Yeah.
So that CapEx cycle isn't slowing down. And what's interesting is everyone talks about data centers, but what we're talking about is the periphery of that, the ecosystem that supports AI infrastructure, which to your point is fiber. Everyone went to sleep on towers. Towers is having one of the best years it's had in 16 years. All four major U.S. tower operators, DigitalBridge, SBA, Crown, and American, are reporting growth that they haven't seen in a decade. And colos are back. Why? Because networks are congested. Why? Because of chat, because of AI.
Yep.
And so, when you listen to Jensen and you listen to Masa's son at the beginning of the year, both gave really important speeches about mobile data traffic. And what was so interesting is when public cloud got into mobile devices, Bill, mobile data traffic went up 10x from 2013 to 2016. In 3 years, the introduction of applications, cloud-native applications on cell phones, mobile data went up 10x. Now we're putting AI onto mobile devices. Masa thinks it's a 5x. Jensen thinks it's 3x. It doesn't matter who you believe. The reality is the existing amount of spectrum that sits on the U.S. infrastructure today is insufficient to handle AI. So the only thing you can do is do what? You cell split.
Yep.
And as you cell split, you densify. You move the antenna heights down. You create more cell towers, which creates more fiber, more jobs, more construction. And here we go. We're spending $1 trillion on mobile infrastructure around the globe to accommodate AI on the device.
Yep.
So that got kind of left out to the side. Well, why? Because we're building, $20 billion data centers in the middle of Texas and Wisconsin. So all of a sudden that becomes less interesting. But I do think the ecosystem is interesting, and I do think you need more fiber. You need more small cells. You need more towers. You need more edge compute. We're moving into inferencing. At DataBank, we're seeing 50% of our new leases are inferencing versus AI or versus traditional cloud. So there's all these things around the periphery that are happening in infrastructure that give me a ton of optimism. Now, what does that do to the general economy? I think, look, AI is a mixed bag for the general economy because it's all about jobs. Yeah. We're always going to look at jobs, and jobs will be a reflection of interest rates, and interest rates will be a reflection of consumer confidence and more important, corporate confidence.
Yep.
In terms of borrowing. So this is a tricky one because the labor market is soft for the first time. Nobody wants to talk about it publicly because it's not like people don't want to say that the labor market's soft, but it is soft. For the first time, when we have an open position, for a good VP or principal or associate, we used to get 10 or 20 resumes. Now we're getting 80 to 100. And it's not because everybody wants to work at DigitalBridge. It's because in Wall Street, people are cutting jobs.
Yep.
The banks are cutting jobs. Private equity firms are cutting jobs. And so that high-skilled white-collar labor is really interesting, but it's also in a point where, professional services firms are backing down on payrolls. Meanwhile, what we really need is we need people that understand how to build stuff.
Yep.
We need to understand how to put people back to work. We need to train people for the new digital economy. I've been saying this for 2 or 3 years. Certainly said it to the Biden administration. I say it to the Trump administration. We need to train people to go build AI infrastructure. We got to invest in people. Yep. We are making all the right decisions, investing in servers and power and Stargate, all these things that are great for headlines. But really, we got to put people back to work and put them back to work in good jobs. And we're going to need that in AI, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it is following that train, it could be a real problem solver for us in this country, right? Which is
look, you go back 20 years ago, and I know we've run over time, but when I was the chairman and president of the wireless association industry, working for the tower industry, I give Mike Fitch a lot of props for this, but we went to the U.S. military because we didn't have enough people to build towers. And so what do? We created the Warriors program, Warriors for Wireless, and now we've put over 2,800 military veterans back to work doing what? Foundations, stacking towers, building roads, putting all that infrastructure in place to accommodate what at that point in time was the migration from 3G to 4G.
Yep.
We have to take that same kind of approach. We have to figure out how to educate people, put them to work, and most importantly, put people to work that are mission capable. And so this is the challenge that I would levy to our friends from the White House is let's put people back to work, let's get them the right jobs, let's train them in AI, just like we trained them in wireless infrastructure 20 years ago.
Well, thank you very much. It was great to have you here, and I apologize if we won't have any questions from the audience. But,
No worries. Thank you.
But thank you so much.